All right, friends. As referenced, it's a one guest town on episode 56 of the Spicer Speaking podcast. Quite fortunate that we got a great guest at that coming to us from London. Although he is I think we can call him a part time SoCal resident. He spent some time, ample time. He can correct me if that's wrong, in Venice, just 100 miles away here from the desert proper. You've seen his work in the likes of The Guardian, CNN, ESPN, Sky Sports, author of three books, as I mentioned at the onset of the show, two of which have come out just in recent months. Welcome, Motez Bishara, to the Spicer Speaking podcast. Motez, good morning from across the pond.
Good morning, good afternoon here. Thank you for the kind intro.
Absolutely, man. Look forward to talking about your work and the diversity of your work. But let's start with this. You are right now in your London home, kind of at the nexus of what's going on in the golf world. As listeners know, I opened up this show railing on LIV Golf and the inaugural event taking place in your backyard, basically at the Centurion Club in London this week. I know that golf may not necessarily be your sweet spot, but sport and society and culture is. Just start with this, Motez. Is there any kind of sports writing, newspaper, media buzz that you're picking up in London for the inaugural LIV Golf event this week?
It's funny, because Britain right now is in such political turmoil and chaos, it's kind of been buried a little bit, even in the sports section. I have, read about it. I've read the headlines that Dustin Johnson and Phil Mickelson are joining. But beyond that, there hasn't been like a lot of hoopla about it the same way it's been written about in the US press. That's partially because you might have heard Boris Johnson almost suffered a defeat of a no confidence vote. Yesterday was a lot closer than people predicted. And so his job is under fire. And people are not sure about the future of the leadership of this country. So in terms of British press specifically, the LIV Golf story has kind of been buried a little bit. But once the tournament starts, I suspect that'll change a little bit.
Because of the political ramifications, human rights ramifications, the cultural ramifications of what's going on with the LIV Golf and how it's going to have a huge impact. We're going to learn a lot here this week and next week for the US Open. I know golf isn't really your sweet spot. I mean, you've written a ton about the NBA, but might this pull you in to the golf sphere a little bit more following the story?
I've been fascinated by it personally. And I think, just to go back to your first question, I think the reason why it hasn't been blown up as much here is because the British press and British media has had a slow burn of the Saudis pouring money into sports that are more popular here. For instance, Formula One. They've already had two big Formula One races. They had the second to last race in the last circuit in last year's season. With Lewis Hamilton, almost, I think he did win that one under controversial circumstances. And they had the second race in this year's season. Also, they've spent a ton of money on boxing. Anthony Joshua, who's been a champion here in Britain for quite a while, fought there against Luis Ruiz for a big heavyweight title. I think the purse was something like 50 million or something crazy. They've been trying to get Tyson Fury out there for a fight too. So British athletes have been going out there for a little while. And now golf is just sort of the next step. And I'm not quite sure if any British big name, I think Ian Poulter was offered a lot of money, but he's not a huge name anymore. So that's perhaps why. But yeah, I've been absolutely fascinated by the story.
I'll step back a little bit, ask you broadly, a man of my own heart, Motez. I mean, going through your work, and we'll get to your books here in a moment, but you certainly seem to have found your own sweet spot, rather, in really diversifying your writings in your career, incorporating not just one sport, not just one subject matter, but a crossover, which not everybody is either interested in doing or able to do well. but you've had the crossover into sport and culture. Why do you think that both subject matters interest you, and why do you think you've been successful in doing that with your writings?
Well, when I write for the public, I try and add value, and the best way I can add value is to write from a humanistic point of view of things I see off the field, of what athletes do off the field, whether it's social protest or whether it's a unique way of training or their lifestyle. It could be really anything to do with the human side of sports, and I think that's where I come in, and I try to tell their stories from a way in which it touches people and broadens their scope of knowledge of what goes into making an athlete. I mean, I could list, all kinds of different stories I've done. Just off the top of my head, I wrote one about the struggles of professional tennis players who are beyond the top 10, of how they have to book all their flights on their own and their hotels and travel and pay for their hitting partner and their coach and their masseuse and stuff. And it's sort of a one-man traveling circus or one-woman traveling circus, and that can be a very interesting thing that the ordinary fan doesn't really know about. On another level, I've written up a story on the Kansas City Chiefs offensive lineman, who's also a medical doctor, the Canadian player Laurent Duvernay-Tardif. So these kind of unique stories in sports have always fascinated me, especially when it comes to social protest in sport. And I've always found that fascinating, and now we're at another level of consciousness of the crossover between politics and political stances in sports. And I think athletes, especially on the international level, have now found their voice more than they have before, and understand the power of speaking up about matters that are important to them, and using the sports as a platform.
Again, a writer with whom share a heart and a pen in some respects. And those aims and endeavors, Motez, when I look at my own portfolio over the course of just a calendar year, there's a number of articles which I write for money, which these are work or copywriting jobs I might take on occasion. But maybe once a month or once every 6 weeks, there's an opportunity and a unique one to really say something, to do a special article. So again, when I look back on a year's worth of work, there might be a handful that are kind of put in a special place. For some of your work in the vein that we've just discussed, is there an article or maybe two that you can look back on in the recent past and feel like you made a difference with something?
Yeah, there are, and I teach journalism too, and this is the kind of thing I like to try and impart to my students, is that their writing can make a difference. As you know, as a writer, sometimes we struggle with getting paid, and you work a lot, and you got to squeeze out the pay and the dollars, especially as the freelancer. But the payback is sometimes your work does make a big difference, and I've seen it in the past. I wrote about, for instance, the Gay Bowl, the National Gay Flag Football League. Every year they have a tournament that rotates in different cities around America. And now it's just this huge thing that attracts the best flag football teams of all different genders, sexual orientations, races, cultures. It's a very diverse thing that takes up a weekend in different cities, and NFL teams sponsor it and stuff. And I know that community, although I'm not part of it, I know that community was very appreciative of someone coming in and writing for a major outlet like CNN and talking about the human side of why that league is so important to them. And so the outpouring of appreciation I got for that was very gratifying. I'll give you another example on a different end of the spectrum. Is my country of birth is Kuwait in the Middle East. And I went back for a holiday once, and I noticed that we had this stadium that had been built for a few $100 million that was sort of languishing in the desert and not being used. And I used the platform of writing for CNN and investigating why that wasn't used, and the magnifying glass of having the world's a big world media outlet's attention on that, really showed the spotlight on the government of how it was neglectful of that. And lo and behold, only about 6 months later, they fixed it, and it had been languishing for about 2 or 3 years. So, now it's a fully functional operating stadium. It's the national stadium of Kuwait, and I feel like I probably had a small part to play in why it's up and running again.
As a follow-up to that, and again, this is something I think about personally, and this is why I love having a lot of writers on this program. Not only can I cherry pick your ideas, but we can also find a sense of empathy that I hope and trust is interesting to the listeners, writers and otherwise. But in the recent past, is there an interview or a particular story subject whom you interviewed that their story or their answers really stuck to your guts?
Oh, well, okay. This is a good segue now into my book, I think. Awesome. Let's talk about Athletes Who Rock. This is my latest release. And Athletes Who Rock is a collection of 15 interviews, which, as the name suggests, are very top-level athletes, champions in many respects, who are also very adept and skilled musicians. And some of them have gone on to, write hit songs for themselves and others, and played at stadiums. And so having 15 very in-depth interviews with these different magnificent sports personalities, yes, each one of them shined a light and gave me many answers that were surprising to me, and that were, I felt very empathetic with them in terms of the struggles they faced in their lives and how they overcame them and eventually became champions and very successful artists in music as well. I can give you a couple of quick examples.
Please do.
Sure. Damian Lillard of the Portland Trailblazers, U.S. Olympian and future Hall of Famer, one of the top 75 NBA players of all time. The stuff that Dame had to go through to become who he is was really surprising to me. He was not heavily recruited out of college. He went to Weber State, a school, a homogeneously white school, pretty much in the middle of Utah, that had not produced an NBA prospect in 25 years before he got there. He didn't play a minute of his sophomore season in high school before he got to Weber State. And yet his belief never wavered that he would be an NBA prospect. He broke his leg his junior year after he finally got the attention of NBA scouts. And rather than sulk, he sat on a chair with a cast on and shot, I think it was 300 baskets a day, and developed a high arch style that served him well in the NBA. And of course, he's drafted number 6, I think in the 2013 draft, and was rookie of the year over Anthony Davis, the much heralded Anthony Davis. So, stories like that. Dame is also a really talented rapper. He has 4 albums out. His music has been in movies, in TV series like Ballers. And he's a guy that doesn't lack confidence. Anyone who's ever watched him play knows that. But it's also the hard work and tremendous amount of dedication that goes into his craft that really touched me. And there's so many other stories. Bernie Williams of the New York Yankees is in my book too. Bernie went to School of the Performing Arts in Puerto Rico, where there was no sports, actually. He focused on guitar and music, and he played baseball after school, and then, would get home on the bus at about 8 at night, do his schoolwork. He was a 4.0 student, and actually, believe it or not, qualified for medical school in Puerto Rico. His mom was a high school principal, and when he got recruited by the Yankees and signed on with them and moved to the U.S., to continental U.S., to be a minor league player, she enrolled him in medical school in Puerto Rico without his knowledge, and he would go back in the off seasons, and he finished 3 semesters of work before he finally told the dean of the medical school that he just couldn't do both things at the same time at a high level. And the dean said, look, if this baseball thing doesn't work out for you, the door's open to come back, So incredible story. Bernie, when he finished his career, his career with the Yankees, which of course he won 4 World Series and his number has been retired by the most legendary team in baseball, in my opinion. He went back to school and formally trained as a musician again. He went to the Manhattan School of Music, got his degree in musicianship, and now is a full-time jazz guitarist and has been nominated for Latin Grammy. So these stories really touch me, and the things that these people have all faced in their lives never ceases to amaze me.
Friends, you're tuning into episode 56 of the Spicer Speaking podcast. Writer and author Motez Bishara, London-based, part-time SoCal resident. He is my guest. You can find him on Twitter at Motez, M-O-T-E-Z, and the letter B, or you just type his name, Motez Bishara, into the Google machine or Amazon, and you can find all 3 of his books, including his most recent work, which we're discussing right now, Athletes Who Rock. Let me ask you, Motez, a couple questions about that. I'm a Minnesota Timberwolves fan, I guess you can say, as a Minnesota native. Troy Hudson was a guy for the Minnesota Timberwolves that he also crossed over into the music world. I think he had a hip hop career, maybe a couple albums. And I believe, a listener can correct me, but there seemed to be some underlying opinion that his focus on his music was diverting attention and time from working on his game. And Troy Hudson had a great run for a very short window, and then he kind of disappeared. I just started reading the book, which I'm readily enjoying, but is that any kind of thrust, or is there any kind of mention in the book about that sometimes trying to do 2 things well can make you worse at one of them?
It's a criticism that has come up for a number of these athletes. One that comes to mind is the tennis pro Daniela Hachakova, who's number 5 in the world. Daniela, after she started making a name for herself in tennis, got a lot of offers to model. She's also a gifted pianist, but she appeared in Sports Illustrated and in ESPN, The Body Issue, and got some flack from critics who said that the modeling was taking away from her focus on tennis. It's the same kind of criticism that the young starlet Emma Raducanu is now getting. She won the U.S. Open,
Sure.
Most recent winner. And this kind of criticism is not unusual for athletes. But to be honest, I think that idea is kind of waning. You have so many athletes now who are not just diversifying into places like music, into fields like music, but also into business. You saw Kevin Durant has a movie production company. I think LeBron James does too.
Oh, yeah.
They're big, both of them are big tech entrepreneurs. I know Dwayne Wade had a fashion line and a wine line as well. So I think among the top guys, especially, and women, these criticisms are starting to wane a bit, and it's becoming much more acceptable for people like Serena Williams to have their own fashion line and have interests outside of their sport. And frankly, I think that's a very healthy thing. Rather than sort of sitting around and playing video games, during your downtime in the NBA when you're on the road or at home. Or frankly, getting in trouble at the casinos or in other places. So I think being in a recording studio for 6 or 8 hours at a time when you're not having a practice is probably a great thing. It's a productive thing to put your energy, time, and resources into.
Yeah, I'd be the last to want to pigeonhole really anybody to saying, oh, you can only do one thing well. But I do understand in part the criticisms. And there's also kind of this weird totem that as I see it, Motez, where the athletes want to be rock stars, the rock stars want to be actors, then the actors want to be politicians. It's like climbing this totem to like, oh, but I also want to do something else. I don't know if that's a theme at all that is touched upon in your book.
It's a great point. In a way, it is a theme that is touched upon because a lot of these, amazing inspiring characters that I've interviewed are not just good in sports and music. They're good at pretty much anything they set their minds to. So, for instance, former Miami Heat standout Ronnie Cycli, whose number has been retired at Syracuse and was, an excellent basketball player. He's not just a gifted DJ who travels around the world playing his house music, but he's also a big real estate developer in Miami. He builds homes, and he's a big character in Miami in the real estate scene. So he's a very well-known guy. And a lot of them are good at other crafts, whether it's the pioneering street skateboarder Ray Barbie, being an excellent world-class photographer, or everybody's got a story. Kevin Walker, a gifted Swedish soccer player, captain of their championship team, also won the Swedish Idol, like the American Idol competition. Okay. So I have found that, these guys seem to be very successful in everything they touch on because they have the dedication and ability to keep chipping away at skill sets that require a lot of work and a lot of hours. And, as one of my interviewees said to me, you can't be the type of person that gets bored quickly. As anyone, you're into golf, as anyone who has had tried to swing a golf a golf club knows, it takes a lot of work, many, many hours to perfect that swing or even get close to it. And the pros, still tweak their swings after many years. So, you have to be dedicated.
You mentioned the phrase and the word skill set and dedicated. I think evidencing your own skills and diversity and dedication as a writer. Not just that book that has come out this year, but a totally different subject matter, When the Sheik Met the King. This is a book about Michael Jackson, and I believe some curious time he spent in Bahrain. Correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Absolutely.
Country. Okay.
Yes.
Well, what was the impetus for writing this book, Motez?
Sure. Well, it's it's funny. As I mentioned, my country of birth is Kuwait. Bahrain is a country that is not located too far from Kuwait. It's about the same distance as Boston and New York. So we share a lot of things culturally. I have a lot of friends in Bahrain, and it's a country I've been visiting since I was a kid. And it always struck me as curious as to how and why somebody as famous, really at the time, probably the most famous person in the world, Michael Jackson, decided to live in such an unsuspecting country. What took him there? What was he doing there? What were his interactions with the locals? It's such a different culture and scene from the one that he grew up in Indiana and California. So I have contacts. I'm a journalist, and I did some investigative journalism during COVID. Actually, it was during the downtime of COVID, and Athletes Who Rock was in its editorial stage, and it was sort of more choppy in terms of the workflow for that. So I was able to dedicate some time to looking at something else, and I figured it's now or never. There's a lot of people at home who are sort of not traveling and idling, and I can perhaps get them to speak to me about a topic that happened about 15 years prior, which I wanted to jump in before they started losing their recollections and details of their interactions with the King of Pop. And so I managed to speak to some incredible sources, including Jackson's former manager in Bahrain, Guy Holmes, and got some really remarkable stories about what he was doing there. It turned out he was working on a comeback album with the Sheik, who himself was an aspiring songwriter. And so if you could picture it, the two of them would sit hunkered in the Sheik's studio and collaborate on writing songs. And they actually were working on an album. And they even have some songs that are in the vaults in Bahrain that have not come out for various reasons, which I detail in the book. So yeah, please check it out. It's on Kindle, When the Sheik Met the King.
I've got one more for you today, Motez, kind of going in inverse chronological order. It's been about 8 or 9 years since you put out a super fascinating subject matter. Beating the NBA is the title of the book. The subject matter revolve around basically the frugality of trying to find deals at, I think it was every or nearly every NBA arena. Just kind of a quick hitter question. We're, of course, in the NBA Finals. Game 3 is coming up, and what is a compelling series. Tickets now, man. Of course, got 2 big markets. The cheapest ones you can get about $800 or $900. Courtside seats can run you upwards of $25,000.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know if in your search and your attempts and your frugality, if you think you're able to ever swing one of those 25K tickets for a seat.
Not during the finals, I can tell you that. I did sit courtside at a Washington Wizards game, and it was from memory, it was a $900 ticket that I bagged for about $100, and it came with free food and beer, which I was pretty happy about. But it was, it was the Wizards. They weren't a very good team at the time, though they did have John Wall, and it was like a Sunday afternoon, and nobody was interested in going, so I got those at sort of around 10% of the value. When you want to go to the finals, unfortunately, you're going to have to pay at the very least face value, if not 3 or 4 times as much. But they do have these ticket aggregator sites now, like SeatGeek, which really help the frugal fans like myself try and determine what a quote unquote good deal or great deal is. And they aggregate all the secondary ticket markets, and you can come away with probably paying, $1,000 probably for a pretty decent seat, I guess. But it all depends on how badly you want to go, really.
Motez, so appreciative of your time, man. Again, friends, I want to encourage you to check out all 3 of Motez's books, and we talked extensively today about Athletes Who Rock. You can find that via Amazon under Motez, Motez Bishara. You can also follow Motez at Twitter. That's at Motez and the letter B. Certainly adding, well, as I said, I started reading that book, so I look forward to finishing it in my summer reading list. Motez, fascinating to visit with you, hear about your really interesting career, man. Thank you so much for joining the Spicer Speaking podcast.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much. It was really fun. And, I'd love to come back and talk some more about golf and other topics.
All right. We always welcome you back to Southern California. Thanks, man.
Thank you. Take care.